The room went quiet before anyone said a word. Not silent, worse. That soft, collective inhale people make when something private suddenly becomes public. 200 well-dressed strangers turned their heads at once. I could hear fabric shifting, heels pausing, and a glass clink somewhere behind me. My wife stood at the entrance, clipboard in hand, her smile brittle. She didn't look surprised. She looked prepared. "You're not on the list," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "There must be a mistake." Her eyes never met mine. For a moment, I tasted metal, the kind you taste when your blood pressure spikes and your body prepares for impact. I felt the weight of my suit, the stiffness of the collar she helped me choose. I smelled lilies and expensive perfume. I felt the heat of judgment crawl up my spine. 200 witnesses. One accusation. I smiled. "It's okay," I said quietly. Then I stepped back, turned around, and walked out. I didn't look back, because I already knew what I would see: relief on her face, satisfaction disguised as confusion. The door closed behind me with a sound too soft for what had just ended. By the time I got home, the house felt unfamiliar, like I was trespassing in a place I had paid for, but never truly owned. I loosened my tie, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the faded ring where her coffee mug always rested. Then I called my lawyer. The next day, they received everything. I raised that girl, not by title, but through birthdays, school pickups, science projects, and late-night talks after her first heartbreak. I was there when her father disappeared, and her mother learned how to smile through clenched teeth. I stepped into a life that was already cracked and quietly paid for the repairs. I taught her how to drive. I fixed her bike. I sat through recitals I barely understood and cheered louder than anyone else. When she got engaged, she hugged me harder than she hugged her mother. "You'll walk me down the aisle," she whispered. I believed her. That was my first mistake. The second was ignoring how my wife had changed in the months leading up to the wedding. Conversations stopped mid-sentence whenever I entered the room. Emails closed too quickly. She stopped calling it our wedding and started calling it hers. She became efficient, controlled, distant. At night, she slept facing away from me, her phone glowing under the covers. I told myself it was stress. Weddings do that to people. They reveal fault lines. I just didn't realize I was standing directly on one. The signs had always been there. I can see them now with surgical clarity. The sudden insistence on separate finances, just until after the wedding. The way my name quietly disappeared from vendor emails. The calm certainty in her voice when she suggested I take a back seat on the big day. "You've done enough," she said once, smiling like a knife wrapped in silk. And I nodded. I always nodded, until I didn't. The night after the humiliation, I didn't sleep. I replayed the last decade like surveillance footage. Every compromise framed as love. Every document I signed without reading. Every moment I ignored my instincts because I trusted her. By morning, the pain had cooled. Cold pain is useful. I stopped reacting and started watching. Quietly, carefully. I checked records, emails, bank statements, not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed the truth. What I found wasn't betrayal. It was architecture. She had been preparing for this wedding like a coup. Assets shifted. Beneficiaries changed. My name erased from properties I paid for, replaced with hers and her daughter's. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a transition of power, and I was no longer needed. The moment it clicked, something inside me locked into place. Grief gave way to calculation. Emotions flattened into angles, leverage, and timing. I stopped confronting her. I stopped asking questions. I started documenting everything. Screenshots, copies, timelines. I handed it all to my lawyer without commentary. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. His silence told me enough. We didn't rush. That was the key. The plan wasn't dramatic. It was precise. Divorce filings timed perfectly with the honeymoon. Injunctions served quietly. Accounts frozen before they could be emptied. A forensic accountant combing through 10 years of financial manipulation. And then there was the wedding gift. I may have been excluded from the ceremony, but my name was still attached to the trust that funded most of it, a detail my wife assumed I would never notice or never challenge. We did both. The trust was dissolved 48 hours after the wedding. Legally, cleanly, irrevocably. The venue had been paid for. The dress had been paid for. The photographer had been paid for. But the house they planned to move into? That was no longer theirs. The call came 3 days later. She didn't begin with anger. She began with disbelief. "You did this?" she asked, her voice shaking. "This has to be a mistake." I almost laughed. "No," I said calmly. "That's your line." Then she screamed, accused, threatened, promised consequences she couldn't deliver. I listened quietly and said nothing. Silence becomes deafening when someone expects you to beg. When she finally stopped, I spoke. "You erased me in front of 200 people," I said. I simply corrected the paperwork. The divorce finalized quickly. Evidence has gravity. It pulls outcomes toward the truth. Her social circle fractured. Questions spread. Stories changed. The daughter stopped calling. I didn't chase her. Love given conditionally is debt, not affection. The house was sold. My half returned to me, with interest. I moved into a smaller place. Quiet. Sunlit. Mine. Sometimes I still think about that moment at the entrance, the heat, the stairs, the way humiliation feels like being skinned alive. I don't regret leaving. I don't regret making the call. I only regret mistaking tolerance for loyalty and silence for safety. Because revenge isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It doesn't swing. It waits. It watches. It remembers. And when it finally moves, it does so with the confidence of someone who already knows they've won. Betrayal taught me that love without respect is just performance. Justice taught me something better. Control is reclaimed quietly, and dignity, once stolen, can only be restored by walking away with everything they thought you'd never notice was missing.